In this world, a simple walk can turn wild. History can be found around the corner, and those here before can seem as fleeting or real as we choose to believe. Welcome to the lands of the people of the jaguar, the Maya. Distinct groups, all with their own language and special folklore, and sharing a special common heritage. And for them, while one era has ended, another era strongly exists, one perhaps as mysterious to us as the other, until we begin to explore and learn, and then to understand the worlds of the Maya. For centuries, one of the doors to their world has opened at this very unlikely spot, in the southern part of the Yucatan Peninsula, the waterfront of Belize City. It's a lusty, laid-back town the English pirates started back in the 1630s. They say it was built on rum bottles and mahogany chips, because the pirates found mahogany trees in the forest and began exporting the wood to England for furniture makers. Now the descendants of the slaves they brought to do the logging make up the majority of residents, and most of them make their living from fishing. Since the English ruled Belize until the early 1980s, everyone speaks English, or patois, and the heritage of England does set Belize apart from the rest of Spanish-speaking Central America. Informality is the key here, along with knowing the story of almost everyone in town. Tommy Shaw does. Tommy and his sister Jeannie run the hotel their mother Jean started back in 1973.
Have a small group checking in.
Jean became a bona fide legend here for making strangers feel comfortable, and brother and sister are trying to carry on her legacy. For her efforts in tourism, their mother Jean was awarded the title of Member of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth, a title she was very proud of until she died in 1999. Jay Crofton is another local story. Jay's originally from Texas, but has lived in Belize for over 25 years. He started this car rental agency, and he lives here with his family, a menagerie of pets, and ancient artifacts and gardens, all under a corrugated rooftop. His pets, especially his parrots, show remarkable hospitality if you let them. And sometimes, even when you don't. We've come for a car, but to also see Jay's fine collection of both pirate and ancient Maya artifacts.
From the river, most of these I've bought. It's about 300 years old. Back during the pirate times, it was their traditional run bobble. The main roads were the rivers, and when they got through, they threw them overboard.
Belize has so many artifacts, they're easy to find and collect, but they can't be exported, so Jay just tries to preserve them instead of seeing them smuggled out of the country. His Belizean experience has been a rough and tumble challenge.
In the early years, it was like the Wild West. And it's to know you come and survive. Living here and doing business here is far different than anywhere else.
But he'd never think of moving away. We're moving away to explore north along the coast, where there are dozens of islands, to get a bird's eye view of the world's second largest barrier reef. It's smaller only than the one in Australia, and this lies just a few miles offshore. It's what first attracted the English pirates and now most of the tourists. 6 miles inland is the ancient Maya city of Altunha. And junior explorers Aletha and Carl, they use it like a huge playground. they have no idea of its historical significance. Its 13 temples, once part of a major trading post connecting the Caribbean with centers inland, all the way to Guatemala. And its empty central plaza, once jammed with merchants and traders. And what they're climbing around are not tombs of warlords and kings, but of priests, as well as a unique form of sacrifice practiced only here at Altunha. Offerings of incense and carved jade pennants smashed into pieces and then cast into the fire and scattered on the floor, left as sort of a fossilized ceremony to be discovered 1,300 years later. They don't know over 10,000 lived here during its 600-year life. Now they just see hints of hundreds of other structures surrounding him for over 2 miles, still waiting to be uncovered. North to Corozal District, we pass other Maya temples, also waiting just to be uncovered. But what's underneath this resort town will probably never be known, because the new city has been expanding over an ancient city dating back to the beginning of Maya history, 2,000 years before Christ. And here, another welcome awaits us.
They don't know where Belize is on a map. They don't know that we speak English here. Down here 3 years ago now.
Charlie Rubley is another expatriate from the States. And he and his wife Maria have just completed a fascinating project. The couple bought a historic, rundown hotel and have transformed it into a charming place. But while still loving Belize, they're considering moving to her native country of Colombia and selling their creation. If you're interested, just call Charlie. Across town, though, another building stands in a small park, and this one has been historic for centuries. All that's left of the very important Maya city of Chotamel, now called Santa Rita. For centuries, all of the cacao, the honey, and vanilla sent inland for trade was controlled from right here. And when the Spanish discovered Chotamel, they were so brutal, the Maya abandoned the city and fled north to Mexico. And the Spanish continued trading here all through the Aztec period. And that's been confirmed by the many artifacts and burial remains found under these interconnected doorways and rooms. Now, since New Corozal town sits over 50% of the ancient town, over 3,500 years of fascinating trade history has been shrunk into a lovely little park. At least until someone starts digging deeper. In town, 3 generations of Yucatilla Maya families show us their traditional home to see how they live. They raise chickens, and some of the flock look a little strange. No, they're not shaved or sick. They're born this way. After a while, they'll sprout a few feathers, but for now, run around naked, picking up their breakfast of corn. Maria's fixing the family's breakfast, kneading corn dough for tortillas. And unlike the corn the chickens are eating, there's a lot more significance to tortillas than we realize. Corn has always been the main staple of Maya life. They say you can actually tell what group of Maya they are by the way they form the circles of dough. But they all cook them the traditional way, over a fire stove, on traditional metal plates. Looks easy, doesn't it? It's not. Besides corn, this family grows almost everything they need for food. Lots of native vegetables and fruit, and they're used to preparing everything from scratch. Coconut shredding's easier with a machete. It's the main kitchen tool. Machetes are still used for all kinds of things. And the bent end of a broken machete fastened to a stool works very well. A hurricane devastated Corozal back in 1955, and it was all rebuilt with modern utilities, but many Maya families prefer their traditional homes and practice their old traditions with a subtle, self-sustaining pride passed on to their grandchildren. In City Hall downtown, a mural tells the story of the caste war in the Yucatan and how the Maya fought the Spanish and later English logging interests over land. Starting in the mid-1800s, for 60 years, it wrought havoc, forcing many Maya to flee south. But the ironic result? These Maya now live on the same waterfront their ancestors had to abandon hundreds of years before. Orange Walk was also settled by refugees from the caste war. And as the sugar industry grew, so did the town. Today it processes sugarcane from all over northern Belize. It also processes a surprisingly good fast food breakfast. At corner stands, the women make burritos with a mixture of beans and eggs and a little bit of magic that tastes a whole lot better than most of our fast food. A good place to fill up before heading to a Maya city which had one of the longest human occupation spans anywhere, Lamanai. We're going down the water the Spanish named the New River, past cormorants in the trees, and further along, some big tree iguanas, beautiful lizards, even a few caiman. But even when our boatman points them out, some of the creatures are hard to recognize. You see those brown spots on the trees? Watch them. Tiny bats. Other passers-by are more recognizable. On the banks of the New River Lagoon, a city that was heavily populated well over 3,500 years, from 1500 BC into the 19th century. It's fascinating to see just how much plant growth covered these once flourishing ancient cities. Lamanai has over a dozen major structures and more than 100 minor ones. And although it's been heavily excavated, 95% still hidden. In some areas, the jungle's so dense, very little light ever reaches the ground. But the dimness protects the little creatures who will sometimes surface. But you have to look kind of carefully to see them, like this toad. The Maya always built their cities on an axis with the cardinal directions. On flat ground, the buildings would sprawl out for miles. On more hilly ground, the temples were raised to very impressive heights. And Lamanai has both. One of the tallest is the Temple of the Sacrifice. And this, like all their temples, was oriented according to the orbits of the stars. And the so-called temple steps were actually different layers of their afterworld. So climbing down these steep ones, it's good to go slow. Remember, this was the temple of sacrifice. Walking across the plaza, we're told there would always be a ball court nearby. The ball court was sacred to the Maya. And on Lamanai's ball court, underneath this gigantic center marker, they found a vessel filled with shell and jade objects resting on a pool of mercury, an element thought only known in the highlands. Lamanai is special for several reasons. It's not only very old, but it wasn't abandoned like so many other cities. Even the Spanish stayed here and built churches, trying to Christianize the people. Now howlers look down on the many buildings and burial sites and found materials that are offering amazing information. But to the north, south, and west, there's so much more. South along the Caribbean coast, we can take a break from exploring. Enjoy the savanna that stretches for miles through the Stand Creek district to the town of Placencia. But then it stops. Ruts and bumps and streams. Placencia has an airport, but the road trip offers a unique experience. Along with some colorful flowers. And colorful, larger things. Cottages, each named after a flower. Nothing like staying at a resort whose rooms look like a bunch of blossoms. It's still possible to stay at low-key traditional resorts in Placencia, the tip of a small peninsula that parallels the coast. And here, we can imagine what it must have been like for those ship-bound explorers, discovering this part of the Caribbean coast. Even today, it's possible to have an entire beach to yourself, to totally relax. Or perhaps do a little exercising. But you have to be careful wiggling your toes. Overhead, a frigate bird could mistake it for lunch coming out of the sand and dive bomb. All over Belize, little shops and out-of-the-way places have wonderful examples of Maya weaving and handicrafts. Recognizing the Maya in Belize isn't easy now because everybody wears Western-style clothing here, at least in public. But in case you want to question the authenticity of the items, just watching this guy will dispel all doubts. Creating beautiful handicraft is one of the traditions shared by all the Maya groups throughout these two countries. And obviously, not just women create the motifs of nature that are so popular. Now, more outsiders are discovering this part of paradise, building homes and staying at luxury hotels. But this part of Placencia still offers a warm, welcome respite. No wonder the Maya and the Spanish and the English pirates loved these coasts. 75 miles west, archaeological students are taking a respite from work in San Ignacio's. San Ignacio's is in the Cayo district. It's close to the Guatemalan border. The town is near several interesting sites like Cajalpeche, Caracol, and Caves Branch. It's also in the middle of farm country, and close by, communities of Mennonites. Over 5,000 Russian-German Mennonites first emigrated to Belize in the 1950s, and since then, they've transformed their regions into some of the most productive lands. They raise most of the fresh produce and livestock and poultry, almost independent of the government, with their own schools, police force, stores. This one, called Spanish Outlook, is very progressive. Here they use mechanized equipment to raise crops. And if you feel the need to get out of the jungle and into practically anywhere, just a drive through Spanish Outlook will do the trick. But many other Mennonite communities still farm without machines and still speak only German. And just a few miles away, we discover the corbelled archways at a site called Cajalpeche. The Maya perfected the corbelled arch. They used them in most of the 30 buildings in this little city. And wandering through the passages gives an up-close and personal feel to these residences. In its 1800 years, Cajalpeche rose to prominence, then surrendered to a neighboring town, much like the fiefdoms of medieval Europe, and then abandoned around 800 AD. The city was rediscovered fairly recently, and excavation's still at a preliminary stage. Today, a group is working with Dr. Hami Awi. He's director of the Belize Archaeological Department.
But it looks like something we call Sierra Red, which is, you notice the flange is not as big. It's not as pronounced. These guys found it today, down here. Yeah, but some people call it Peten glassware. They're imports. That's the earliest part of the early classics, about 250 to 350 AD.
They're sifting to find the smallest pieces.
We have a competition to see who can find the most.
Dr. Awi also tells us about a discovery they made just a couple of days ago.
We also found most of the skeleton of what we think was a small jaguar, and buried inside with, in the tomb. So it was quite a sort of breastplate or necklace with lots of lots of bones, probably from deer.
Interesting, but just the beginning.
Some jade jewelry. In fact, there's a beautiful jade.
We're invited to one of the most inaccessible ruins in Belize, and now recognized as one of the largest and most important sites in all Central America, including Guatemala and Mexico. We caravan with archaeologists to a city so remote that coming here is only by special permission from the government, the newly emerging magnificent city of Caracol. It once controlled a huge area in this region, and its monuments tell of victories even over the warlords of Tikal in Guatemala. Caracol covers over 65 square miles, and over 100,000 lived here. Dr. Awi worked on this site for about 4 years and deciphered some of the stelae for us.
Because of his alliance with Calakmul. Can is too young. So his ends of either end of the bar, it opens out, and out of there is coming out ancestors. And you can see that because you can see the faces. So the bar is going there, and at the end of the bar, it's like a mouth, and look at this little ancestor coming out. The eye, the nose, the mouth, the ear, flare, the fancy headdress. Come over on the other side.
He also explains how the buildings were used as astronomical observatories.
The sun aligns itself in a certain way to the structure during different times of the year. So if you are here, maybe about 3 days before, the sun is dead center over that building, Earth is moving back. So the days are starting to become shorter and lining up right here, dead center with this. And then
in the past few years, the Belizean government has invested almost $2 million to restore Caracol to some of its former glory. And they're using a new technique to preserve the carvings and masks they're finding on the exteriors. Jose shows us what has been accomplished already by some of the over 160 workers who live here full-time. It hasn't been easy. Everything has to be trucked in. All the food, even the closest water, is 12 miles away. But the results have been worth it. Instead of covering the exposed masks and carvings with thatched roofs, they take measurements and then make an exact duplicate out of clay. Then liquid fiberglass is poured over a mold and placed over the original, so they're protected from the elements.
In clay. These guys are awesome. They're great artists. And then using the one that we make out of clay,
it's tedious work, but it's worth it. These duplicates are indistinguishable from the original.
And there's another one on the other side. Now, what's neat about this is that it is fiberglass. Okay, Eli knows. Stylized die, stylized die. Now, isn't this so much nicer than building a big roof over it? And if I didn't tell you, it's fiberglass, you would know.
Here we're at another ceremonial center, and it has the largest and tallest man-made structure in all of the country. It's called Kana, or Sky Place. And on top, we can look down over 14 stories to yet another plaza. The results, Dr. always says, of intense excavation.
100 workers, and it took them about 380 days to complete. To do the excavation and then the conservation.
Although so far only 75 of the estimated 1,100 buildings have been uncovered. But we can see why Caracol is now one of the most amazing sites in Belize, and why it's so important to them as a country and culture. It's a symbol of what the first Belizeans were able to accomplish. Guatemala may have Tikal, Honduras Copan, and Mexico Chichen Itza, but in Belize, Caracol is king. A little east, Hummingbird Highway goes right through the Mesoamerican Biological Corridor. It includes almost 30% of Central America's territory, and it links ecosystems, indigenous communities, and private lands all together. And the paved highway is kept clear of any roadkill by black vultures. However, another bird surprises us. Coming out of the trees is a king vulture. The king is rarely seen, even here, but it's the largest and most colorful of all the vultures. And this one certainly lives up to its name. Watch the others acquiesce. They sort of give it the respect it deserves. Unfortunately, though, the traffic doesn't. Driving past indigenous villages, we begin to appreciate the biological corridor, the goal to keep a continuous forested area all the way from Mexico through Panama and protect it into the future. But off Hummingbird Highway, there's a brand new building. It's the reception area and restaurant of the Caves Branch Jungle Lodge. The owner of this adventure resort is from Canada, Ian Anderson. Ian came to Belize several years ago, and he's opened a whole new Maya world to explore.
Sure, I was sitting at home one typically rainy Sunday afternoon in Vancouver, Canada, and watching a half-hour travel show about Belize. I'd never heard of Belize before, but it seemed interesting enough for me to start researching it, which I did for about 6 months. People to understand just how spectacular and fabulous and just awe-filled the experiences of going deep into the caves, into the Mayan underworld, Xibalba.
Xibalba, the Maya underworld. It can only be entered through the caves that are its passageways. The only way to reach this particular cave is by water, using tubes to float into the darkness. And then, by foot. Welcome to this Maya world of stalactites and stalagmites, and vampire bats startled by our headlamps, hundreds of them. Some in their ceiling nests, confused by the brightness. Our path is slow, slippery, and surreal. Even with our illumination, it's not hard to imagine what fear and danger this darkness must have presented to earlier people. Because only ancient priests and shamans could enter to present offerings to their gods and sacrifice whatever they believed would please them. And after almost an hour of very careful treading, we reach their special sacrificial center and see what's been left for centuries, undisturbed original, and fascinating. And this is just one of the hundreds of caves found so far in Belize. And many contain artifacts like this one. Some even have the remains of human sacrifices. And along with the artifacts in this darkness are living things. A harvester spider. It's cousin to our daddy longlegs, part of the scorpion family. And further on, catfish. As we can see, these catfish actually have eyes, so they must be able to swim the stream to the outside. And as for the humans who now come to explore this secret atmosphere, to feel the presence still here of this 2,000-year-old experience and touch an obscure part of the past, it can perhaps open their eyes just a little more as they too reach for the light. South in the Toledo district are the foothills of the Maya Mountains. And along the top of a ridge, another unique ancient center, Nimli Punit. Nimli Punit was discovered by oil company workers in 1976. And here have been found the largest collections of stones, stelae, anywhere in the country. There are 25. At least 8 are carved, and one remains the tallest carved stone in most of the entire Maya area, over 31 feet tall. These stelae are not just stone slabs. They're history books exposed now to the elements. On them, the writings of beliefs and battles and events, dates, places, names, invaluable documentation of this culture whose other books were burned by the Spanish. The government's trying to protect these, but limestone chips away in time. The writings become obscure. And looting has already damaged many. Looters cut off the glyphs and smuggle them out of the country. The Visitors Center protects this one with the jaguar god. The bowl below was used for holding blood. Serious archaeological work did not begin at Nimli Punit until 1983, and in '86, when test pits were sunk into the ceremonial area, a royal tomb was discovered. And peering in, we can see how carefully they were constructed. Why so many impressive monuments here? Still a puzzle. Until that's answered, the true position of Nimli Punit in the ancient world remains a mystery. Through the forest and not far from Nimli Punit is a village started by 6 Kichki Maya families almost 60 years ago. It's called Laguna Village. And along with their domestic pigs are about 100 friendly but rather shy people, as well as this not-so-shy wild pig. It's a peccary. Strangers